Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into the 13th century to look at a man whose actions literally redrew the map of the Middle East. We're talking about the enigmatic, utterly fearsome Mongol commander, Hulagu Khan. This is the guy who ended a centuries-old caliphate and brought unthinkable tragedy to the streets of the Islamic world's greatest capital. So, think about this for a second. For hundreds of years, the Islamic Golden Age was the global beacon of science, math, literature, and philosophy. And then, it just stopped. What single event could have possibly triggered the sudden, violent end to such a monumental era of human progress? Well, that's exactly the mystery we're going to unpack today. Okay, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the rise of Hulagu Khan, look at his first target, the Ismaili assassins, and then dive into the massive turning point, the fall of Baghdad. After that, we'll cover his eventual defeat, the rise of the Ilkhanate, and wrap up with his incredibly complex dual legacy. Let's kick things off with part 1, the rise of Hulagu Khan.
Hulagu wasn't just some random soldier who worked his way up the ranks. Not at all. He was royalty, the grandson of Genghis Khan himself. His dad was Tawui, Genghis' youngest son, and his mom, Sorgatani Beki, was an incredibly intelligent and influential princess. So he grew up in this ultimate dynastic powerhouse alongside brothers you've probably heard of like Kublai and Möngke. And following strict Mongol tradition, he was trained from day one as a warrior, absolutely mastering the deadly arts of horsemanship and archery. He was literally born and bred for conquest.
The real game changer happened in 1251. When his brother Möngke Khan took the title of Great Khan, he handed Hulagu a monumental task. The mandate was simple but massive. March into southwestern Asia and bring it entirely under Mongol rule. Which brings us to part 2, his first target, the Ismaili assassins. Setting out from Mongolia in 1253 with this huge army, Hulagu was incredibly methodical. He didn't just rush the biggest prize right out of the gate. It was a calculated 3-step campaign. First, eliminate a deeply entrenched local threat in 1256, then hit the grand capital of Baghdad in 1258, and finally, push west into Syria by 1260. So before even looking at Baghdad, he had to deal with the Ismaili assassins, famously known as the Hashashin. This was a super mysterious, deadly sect known all over the region for their supposedly unbreakable mountain fortresses and their habit of, assassinating high-profile political figures. But in 1256, Hulagu rolled in and actually captured their famous Alamut fortress. By virtually wiping out this entire sect, he totally cleared the path for his ultimate target. And that takes us directly into part 3, the devastating fall of Baghdad. Now, the tragedy of Baghdad wasn't just a military defeat. It was compounded by a massive miscalculation. In early 1258, as Hulagu's forces closed in, the ruling caliph al-Musasim kind of brushed it off. He just didn't take the Mongol threat seriously enough and delayed asking for outside help. Underestimating that massive Mongol war machine with its advanced siege engines and superior tactics was a mistake that set the stage for total disaster. And when the Mongols struck, it was blindingly fast. The brutal siege began on January 29th. Barely 2 weeks later, on February 10th, the completely overwhelmed city surrendered. But as we know with the Mongols, surrender didn't necessarily mean you were safe. Just a week later, they unleashed a terrifying wave of relentless massacre and looting across the city. Estimates suggest anywhere from 200,000 to over 1 million people were killed. Let that staggering number sink in for a second. The sheer scale of the devastation unleashed on what was, at the time, a thriving, world-class metropolis is just almost impossible to comprehend. And the horrific loss of life was matched by an incalculable loss of human knowledge. They burned homes, grand mosques, and vast libraries to the ground, including the legendary House of Wisdom, which was arguably the greatest library on Earth back then. Historians say so many thousands of priceless texts were thrown into the Tigris River that the water literally ran black from the ink. As for the caliph, Mongol tradition held that royal blood shouldn't touch the ground. So Hulagu had him tightly rolled up in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. It's a brutal image, but it marks the definitive, tragic end of the Islamic Golden Age. Moving on to part 4, defeat and the Ilkhanate. With Baghdad in ashes, Hulagu pushed his forces even further west into Syria. But in 1260, his unstoppable momentum finally hit a wall.
A portion of his army suffered a massive loss against the Mamluks at the Battle of Ain Jalut, which was actually the very first major Mongol defeat. Right around the same time, news broke that his brother, Great Khan Möngke, had died. That forced Hulagu to pack it up, halt his western expansion, and retreat back to Iran.
This retreat really forced a pivot. Hulagu transitioned from being just a ruthless conqueror to an actual grounded administrator. He set up what we now call the Ilkhanate, a brand new sector of the Mongol Empire centered in the Azerbaijan region of modern-day Iran. As a ruler, Hulagu underwent a really fascinating shift. On the administrative side, he started strengthening taxation and building up robust trade networks. But culturally, things got even more interesting. Despite the absolute destruction he caused in Baghdad, Hulagu, who personally leaned toward Buddhism, fostered a surprising amount of religious tolerance. A massive reason for this was his wife, Dakus Khatun. She was an Nestorian Christian, and under her influence, he not only tolerated different faiths, but also actively patronized brilliant scholars like Nasir al-Jandin al-Tusi. He was essentially starting to rebuild the very sort of intellectual framework he had just destroyed.
Which brings us to our final section, a dual historical legacy.
Hulagu Khan passed away on February 8, 1265, and he left behind this incredibly complex dual legacy. On one hand, you have the brutal conqueror, the guy who destroyed Baghdad, slaughtered hundreds of thousands, ended the Golden Age, and whose name still evokes terror today. But on the other hand, you have the empire builder, the man who founded the Ilkhanate, stabilized regional trade, supported scholars, and laid the foundation for generations of Mongol administration in Iran. He absolutely, undeniably reshaped Middle Eastern governance forever. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. When you look at the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the knowledge lost and the total upending of political power, was the destruction of Baghdad the single biggest turning point in Islamic history? It's a stark, pretty chilling reminder of how dangerous absolute power can be, and how one man's mandate can arrive on horseback and forever alter the course of human history. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep digging into the past, and I'll